Meeting of the ASCD board. Thank you all for joining. Why don't we start with introductions? I'll just identify your box and then you can introduce yourself. So we'll start with Peter.
Peter Conlon.
Yep. Great. Caitlin.
Caitlin Steele, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Suzanne.
Suzanne Buck.
Vicki.
Vicki Wells, Director of Student Services.
Mary.
Mary Gill.
Amy.
Amy McGlashan.
Jory.
Dory Jacobite.
Chip.
Chip Malcolm.
Peter.
Peter Burrows, Superintendent.
Brittany.
Brittany Gilman, Business Manager.
Mary Cullinane. Lorraine.
Rain Morse.
Victoria.
Victoria Jetty.
And Will. Will, I think you're on mute.
He's not on mute, but the mic wasn't working.
Probably too many people. He's still on mute. Oh.
All right, well, I'll introduce Will, and then Will, just check out your audio connection. Peg is hoping, okay. Great.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can. Yep. That's awesome.
I'm Will Hatch, Technology Director.
Thanks, Will. So at this time, we'd like to provide an opportunity for anyone who has joined who wants to make public comment. Peter B. will kind of drive that from an access perspective. So Peter, do we have anyone who is signaling that they would like to make public comment?
I don't see any hands raised currently. If you do want to make public comment, if you could raise your hand, then I will select you. Okay, no raised hands here.
Okay, thank you. Next up is to approve the minutes of April 27th and April 30th.
I motion to approve them.
Chip has a motion to approve. Do I have a second? Both of them?
Second.
Thank you, Victoria. Any discussion or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Okay, next up in line is to approve the bills. Chip, you're up.
This particular meeting, there's only one set of bills. They read them, well, it was a 3-week gap, and it's been a week since we read them, so a little simpler than last time. There are also, at times, fewer bills. There are 3 bills, or 3 vouchers. The first one is a Mary Hogan McGilton Fund, which is $4,000. That was for Town Hall Theater, presumably for Shakespeare and that type of work. The second one is for payroll expenses of $825,054.36. And the third one is for the general fund bills. These were all read by Victoria and I presume on the 18th of May, sorry. And this from the general fund bills is for $242,356.08. And I move that those bills be paid.
Second.
Second by Victoria. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Oh, Mary.
Oh, sorry.
The only discussion I would say is it might be easier since you can see all of us if we just raised our hand as an affirmative vote.
Great. Affirmative? I saw everyone's hands.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, next up, Peter B., you are up. Report of the superintendent.
Okay, I'm just bringing in Davina's here, so I'm bringing her in.
Oh, great.
From an attendee. Hi, Davina.
Hi, Davina.
Hello, sorry for running a few minutes late.
No worries.
Okay, great. Well, as I mentioned, we have a presentation here in a moment. A couple of things I wanted to discuss prior to that presentation. You all saw the board report and all the things that are going on right now in the district as we close out this year and we look ahead to what's coming in the fall. So I wanted to just kind of fill everyone in on some of the work I'm doing to work to organize our planning as we move towards summer. I'm currently putting the finishing touches on an outline and a document to organize an ACSD recovery plan that will have a kind of a high-level recovery planning team. This will be the central office leadership, some principals, I think probably the co-presidents of the Teachers Association, a nurse lead, counselor lead, and a few other folks to help as we kind of work through the guidance that we're receiving kind of week by week here as we go through the different changes at the state level, on national level, and we figure out what next year looks like. As all of you know, there's been a lot of great work that's happened over the last 2.5 months. And we realize going into next year with a lot of unknowns that we need to be really flexible and fluid, and we need to be prepared to potentially move quickly. We can't make a plan right now and say this is what we're going to do for the entire 2021 school year. So kind of below this recovery planning team are going to be action teams, which are carrying some of the heavy work that we have to do. One is going to be around health and safety. We need a group that's working on the continuity of learning. We need a group that is working on communication, on the conditions for learning and student services and individualized support. And we need to also be aware of the kind of the policy, personnel, and operational issues that we know are going to be kind of front and center probably throughout the year. So this is, as I mentioned, something that we're finalizing this week. We want to get this structure set up prior to the summer so that these teams can be working throughout the summer to plan. I have been, in my state role, I'm a trustee on the Vermont Superintendents Association. I've been a part of a lot of conversations with other state leaders to try to work to develop a decision matrix to get information from the state and kind of collectively as a group of school districts to make some of the decisions that we need to make to prepare for the fall, and we're kind of right in the middle of that. So I don't have an update on specific information around that, but I can tell you that it's something that we are working on every day as the situation changes. One of the challenges with COVID-19 and I think where we find ourselves is, even though things are starting to relax in Vermont right now, there's really no telling what September will look like, or November, or March. And so that I think kind of reinforces the need to not think about this in terms of kind of one thing or another, but really approaching it flexibly and with a cohesive design so that we can be communicating well, and these structures help to support themselves, and we're not making decisions in silos as we transition. So
Peter, have you noticed any national organization, whether it be a NGO or philanthropic, that has stepped up from here's how everybody should be thinking about this and here are resources to support? Has anybody stood out?
I mean, there are I've probably read 10 to 15 briefs on these are the things you need to consider in developing a reentry plan. So there are lots and lots of groups that are working on, these are some of the foundational pieces that you need to
Yeah.
attend to, and they tend to be around the areas that I just mentioned in terms of
But
how
nobody's
we're
really,
organizing.
you don't feel as if anybody's really above the grade, so to speak.
I mean, I think there are great resources out there to think about it. It's hard to be above the grade right now, because to be above the grade, there has to be a kind of like a platform to rise up off of. I mean, that's kind of our issue right now, is because we don't have the parameters. The best thing we can do right now is have the structures in place so that when we do have the information, we're able to flex and act quickly, and not be reactive. And I think that's one of our biggest takeaways from this 2.5 month experiment. But someone, I might need to mute here.
Yeah, I think if you mute.
I'm not sure who that was. Okay.
Yeah, good.
Okay. I think if you look at the last 2.5 months, one of our big reflections has been, we did an incredible job, but we did it from a reactive stance, necessarily, right?
Yeah, what else? Right.
Well, yeah, everyone was reacting that way.
Right.
So we do have time now, with summer and with experience behind us, to know, because nobody's ever done this before at this level. We can now look ahead and know and predict, given the different phases of reentry, and that's kind of how we're thinking about this, as phases of whether we're fully in school, whether we're partially in person, or whether we're completely remote. We can I think pretty accurately guess from our own experience and from others in Vermont and throughout the country and throughout the world, really, kind of things that are working and things that aren't. So that's the purpose of putting all these planning groups together, is really developing those resources, and it's not just figuring out the operational side of here's how we're going to work, but it's also gathering all that knowledge so that when we do know that we can bring back, let's say it was a situation where half the students could come back, we've got a wealth of information to draw from to know these things have worked, these things haven't worked, and we can move. We're also, we're not alone on this. I've said that a number of times, and I do think we're seeing unprecedented levels of collaboration across the state right now. I've never seen this before. That will continue. Looks like we've got Peg here. One sec. She made it. And so I think some of these solutions will be coming from partners too. So we won't be working in isolation as we figure out, guidance comes from the Vermont Department of Health and the governor that we can do X, Y, and Z. We'll have all school districts in Vermont collaborating and talking about that. Sorry.
I have one question regarding high school principal and the role that the new principal, since the biggest school and the most visible school, and a new principal coming on, which is awkward, but yet experienced principal. And Bill mentioned in his note in the report, that he had been in contact with the new principal. So can you just give us an update on how the new principal will interdigitate with this whole thing and what role he will have?
Yeah, so it is a strange way to start a new principalship, especially one as important as this, and a transition as important as this. He has been in contact, as Bill mentioned, with a number of folks at the high school. I think he's in the process of closing on a house right now too. So he's well on his way to making the transition. On that kind of high level recovery planning team, he'll be a central part of that group. So Bill's gonna start out with that group for probably a few meetings, and then pass the baton to Justin. So he'll be right in the middle of both the MUHS planning and a big part of the district planning as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So I've got a couple other things on my list if folks still have the energy.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
We're just warming up,
Good.
Peter.
I'm
Come
gonna
on.
keep this rolling. I'm gonna keep going here.
These are the questions that we get from people, so it's
Yeah.
important for us to be involved in this.
Yeah, totally. The next thing I want to talk about was Bill Lawson and the fact that he's ending a 25-year tenure, which is huge. We're working on plans. He doesn't know about these plans yet, but we're working on plans to celebrate him in many ways. And we also have a retirement ceremony that we do every year that we'll be acknowledging him from the district perspective. Bill has lots of connections with different groups throughout ACSD, his leadership team, colleagues, the MUHS crew, and others. So I think different groups will be celebrating him in different ways. The graduation information, which I believe all of you have probably seen, we're going to be starting out in the morning with speeches and doing doing graduation in a slightly smaller scale, obviously, but still, Bill's going to do a speech. I'll do a speech. We're going to read through the scholarship information and all that, and then we've got they're scheduling different crews of different kind of cohort groups for students to come through and drive through. Per state guidance, one student can get out at a time and walk across the stage. This is an opportunity, Mary, for you to, as board chair, to be there too, 6 feet apart. So get that on your calendar. It's a full day affair. I think we're starting maybe at 9 and ending around 2. So that's underway to, as I said, to recognize Bill and thank him for everything he's given to the community and the school. And of course, anyone retiring this year or ending something, just as I was mentioning, it's challenging for Justin to start. It's not the way we would have designed this, but we will make the best of it and recognize really what he's done for the students of ACSD over many, many years.
Peter, just a question about graduation. You said that the speeches will go on. Is that all going to be on Zoom? Or is that
it's going to be, my understanding is we're going to do them in the morning, but they're going to be videotaped. And then, so I think they'll be accessible.
We'll get information on how we can view everything.
Tune in. Yeah.
How we can partake as if we were sitting at least in the regular thing. Okay.
I have a question. Regarding Bill's retirement, is there anything we as a board can do to recognize his? I mean, you talked about other affinity groups, but for us as the board, it'd be nice for us to.
I think, Mary, we have a personnel issue to discuss in executive session at the end of the meeting.
Okay. All right.
Mary, does Peg need help to get on, or is she on?
Why don't we unmute her and see if she's there?
Okay, let me see if Peg, are you there?
Yeah,
Great. Okay.
I got to figure it out.
Awesome. Just wanted to double check. Okay. One final thing I wanted to mention, we have our IB verification visit. So this is the end of our 4-year authorization process for the primary years program. It's really exciting. we initially had a big plan to bring consultants here. There were going to be 3 consultants that were going to be traveling throughout ACSD over a number of days. With COVID, that plan changed. We started looking at, well, should we still go ahead with it virtually, or should we wait and try to do it in the fall? And with so many unknowns and so much momentum, we decided that it made much more sense to do it virtually at the end of the year. So that's happening June 10th and 12th, and maybe on the 11th too. And ACSD board members are asked, we need at least 3 or 4 board members on June 12th from 8:30 to 9 to meet with the consultants virtually. There will be a Zoom link for this, and so I just wanted to put that out to folks. Maybe if you're interested, you could either contact Mary or contact me.
Great. Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
What's the date? June 10th?
June 12th,
June 12th.
8:30 to
June
9.
12th. Okay. So with that, if there are no questions, or if there are questions, I'm open to questions. But if not, maybe the Whole Child Wellness Group from the Community Partnership Council could be brought over, and they can share the great work that they've been doing. Mary, are we ready for them, or?
We are ready.
Okay.
Jeez.
Okay, we just keep multiplying, don't we?
Yes, rabbits.
All right, so these are the inspired members of the Community Partnership Council and working on the wellness group. Erica, do you want to start off by talking a little bit about the work and kind of go through the information you're going to share?
Actually, I think Eric is going to take us through. So
okay, great.
I'm going to pass the floor to Eric Remsen, who's been a leader of our team. Eric?
Yep. So that's showing up? Okay.
Yep, great.
So real quick, the Community Partnership Council, we kind of exist to develop kind of community relationships around kind of that were laid out by the strategic plan. We have 2 working groups at the moment. One is focused on mentorship, and then the group that's joined you tonight is focused on wellness. And last fall, kind of we completed our first task, helping to establish the School-Based Health Center at MUHS. And so kind of with the completion of that project, we decided kind of in the winter to, in small groups, visit each of the schools in the district to kind of get a better sense of the wellness needs across the district. And so kind of small groups of us went to all the schools, sat down with administrators, school nurses, other folks who kind of know the wellness needs of each of the schools intimately, and kind of just pick their brains to see kind of what the wellness needs were across the district. After we completed that, we kind of sat down, looked at our notes, tried to find areas of commonality, areas of emphasis that you see here, that we were able to identify these kind of 5 areas that came up in pretty much every school around transportation, physical wellness, emotional wellness, food, and technology. And that's also kind of, there's a little more depth to each of those aspects in the report that I think you all got prior to the meeting. So those were kind of the areas that we identified as areas that have kind of an impact on wellness across the district, and for, you know, both students, staff, and families. So we did this kind of survey of wellness to kind of, for us as the wellness committee, to figure out kind of our next step with the school-based health center up and running. We were looking to kind of identify what our next steps might be around the area of wellness. And then we also thought that it would be worth sharing with the board as you kind of undertook the facilities master planning. And obviously that's on kind of hold at the moment. And so we still kind of thought that it was important to kind of share our findings around wellness with you. And kind of as we work to kind of finalize the report in the past couple of weeks, one of the things we realized was that kind of the actions that ACSD undertook kind of in response to the pandemic kind of matched the values around the importance of wellness. And so kind of, you know, our hope is that kind of as the crisis passes, that the district kind of continues to focus on kind of the basic needs that are seen here in this graphic, under kind of the hierarchy of needs and under wellness, because that has kind of a significant impact on learning. So that's kind of a brief summary of the work that we've done over the winter, and kind of I'll open it up to questions that you might have about kind of maybe digging into specific categories within the report, the findings, or you know, our conclusions and recommendations that were in the report. So I'll kind of stop talking now and take questions.
Thanks for taking the time to present this. As your team kind of went through all this, and now that you have a sense, you know, an opportunity to take a step back and reflect on what was highlighted or brought to light, was there anything that you were just fundamentally surprised by that you didn't expect to uncover?
I think, well, so I'll answer kind of for me, and then others in the committee can jump in with kind of their thoughts. I think for me, the impact that transportation has on kind of wellness and learning, I think that was something that that surprised me, that was kind of mentioned. I think at pretty much every school, just in terms of, you know, in terms of impacting wellness for those that kind of live outside of the Middlebury area, in terms of getting wellness checks or getting to doctor, mental health services, whatever it would be, transportation kind of had an impact there. And then, you know, I think also kind of transportation was often discussed along with isolation, and students who kind of, families who lack transportation, students were often, there were concerns about isolation because of lack of transportation. So for me, at least, transportation, that was kind of the importance of transportation was a surprise for me.
Any other big ahas from the team?
I had a question regarding the clinic or the in-house. I mean, obviously that's, I don't know how long Was it actually functioning before we closed, or I guess my timing I'm not sure on, but.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I'm Kelly. I'm a school nurse at
Okay.
Middlebury High School. We opened up the beginning of December.
Okay, I thought it was
First week
before,
of December. Yep. So we had a few months that we were up and running and had much success. So we're looking forward to getting back in there. And I think the school-based health center is going to take on a big role, getting kids caught up on sports physicals and other things. So it's going to prove to be even more valuable once we get back to school.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Jen?
Hi, everybody. I'm so sorry I'm late. In my head, I thought we were supposed to start at 7, so I definitely on summer mode already. I'm so sorry. So maybe it's already been discussed in the presentation, but if you asked for sort of surprising aha things, and I guess I got to sit on this committee and I got to hear all of these principals and school staff talk about their needs. And for me, as a community member, as a parent, but as a board member as well, I was listening to these needs, and I felt so strongly that it really did tie into our facilities master planning work. And that's why I encouraged the group to share this with you, because of the resource needs. You know, so what I was surprised about was how much at every school we were hearing about how much more mental health support they needed, how much more schools, psychologists and school-based clinicians they could use daily. And I know that we can't afford to have a full-time and any of those at many of our schools, but they all express the need to have more. And so I felt that tie of the resource need with the school system that we have set up right now in a disconnect.
Thanks, Jen. Mary?
Yeah, I'll piggyback onto that. Hi, Kelly. It was so successful at the high school. It just seems like it really, and knowing that the need is continuing to be great at the outlying schools. Is there any way we can, kind of do kind of clinics outside of the central part of Middlebury, since transportation is a big issue? Would these school physician or the physicians who are working in the clinic, would they consider going out to the more rural schools periodically to do that? Oh, Kelly's. Oh.
Kelly and Erica have information on that. They're working on that.
We actually, and Erica can speak to this as well. We've started to have some conversations, had some ongoing conversations with Shorewell Health, looking at some school-based services out in that neck of the woods. And the goal really would be to have this type of service accessible to all students in the district.
Yeah, Shorewell definitely had interest. We weren't able to get it up for as far along as we would have liked to during the school year, but when things, I think right now they've got a lot going on that they're figuring out, so I think it'll be a while before they're really able to pick up the conversation again, but they definitely had interest, and I think there's a good opportunity there for out in Shoreham and Bridport to start working on some kind of relationship to bring services to those schools, both dental and medical.
Right. Yeah, the dental piece, they have the capacity to do dental, which would be awesome, which we would also like to have for Middlebury students, high school students. So we're starting at the high school and hoping to expand on that. So definitely the goal.
I would also add that these services and these needs are going to come into much sharper focus as the state works through the fiscal challenges that are ahead. We are already hearing from a number of agencies that are looking at cuts to mental health and services in general. So it's just going to be that much more important for us to leverage everything we can as we go forward.
It was interesting, these topics of the areas of emphasis that we pointed out, they really did exist in all of our schools in different levels. it was interesting to hear the different conversations and the thoughts about different ways of trying to address it that we can explore as a district.
That's great.
I'll jump in with a question since there was a pause. And I'll just, first of all, sort of echo what Jen said. As I read through this, there were various things that sort of made me think about the facilities master plan and some of the goals we're trying to achieve with that. But on a different topic, I wonder if you were able to get a sense of access by kids, and we probably have a much better sense of it now, but how much lack of access to good broadband was an issue in our school district. If it was a big issue, if it was a small issue.
I think Will has a good pulse in that, even though he's not a group part of this particular group.
Yeah, it definitely came up. I don't know that we really got a good pulse on the magnitude from our visits, but we did, talk about the fact that it was a challenge for a lot of students when school work at home relied on the ability to get on the internet.
You were a little before your time when it came to assessing that problem.
Peter, I'm happy to speak to that briefly if you'd like. I think I was actually kind of surprised that we didn't have more people that didn't have the internet. I think, we didn't necessarily hear from a lot of the people who took advantage of the free offerings or discounted offerings from companies like Comcast. So they didn't necessarily reach out to us to let us know that they didn't have the internet. They read things that we've been putting in our newsletters and picked up the phone themselves. But we did have some people that we only really recently helped. I bought some tablets, Android tablets that get cellular service, and those are working for a few people. They don't work for everybody, unfortunately, because we have some places that don't get any cell service, no matter what the provider is. So I never thought that we could help every single person, but it was really a small number. At least that I am aware of by the time we got towards the end. We have far more people that have poor internet, which I think is a much bigger problem. I see Fernando shaking her head. We have two towns, Shoreham and Cornwall, that use Otelco, and Peter, you're in Cornwall. There's a lot of old phone lines there. Some families are getting 5 megabits per second or less, and they have 4 or 5 people trying to share that bandwidth, and that has not worked out very well for those folks. So, there's a teacher from MUHS who lives in Cornwall I was talking to the other day, and he said, they've worked out a schedule where, they only have a couple people online at a time, and I think there's probably a lot of people that have done things like that in order to get by. But it's certainly less than ideal. There's, for every person in Middlebury who's got 100 megabit per second connection through Comcast, there's probably 2 or 3 people that are trying to deal with 5 megabits per second. So there's a lot of work to do there for sure.
Yeah, I was going to add that. I was really shocked when we transitioned to remote learning and we're in the 90-something% of households that were connected. I think, like Will mentioned, the quality of the connection is the biggest stumbling block as opposed to just being connected. And especially when your entire teaching and learning infrastructure is based on that as well. And it looks like Laura is here. Kelly just mentioned that Laura Basili, who is also on our team, is here on the phone.
She said she had trouble getting on Zoom.
Okay.
Hey, Laura, thanks for joining.
I'll just point out that Laura lives in Cornwall and probably has that old phone line that Will was just describing.
Peter, it does bring up one just, I think it brings up a fundamental question as we start to think about transitioning into the next school year. You know, how does that balance of academic versus social and emotional well-being of these kids and the resources and attention that an institution like a school is giving to those two things? You know, traditionally, you probably are putting more resources behind the academic as it's comparatively, but given the environments that these kids are coming from and given the uncertainty of so much in their lives, you wonder, how are we going to turn that dial enough the other way? Because at the end of the day, if that stuff's not taken care of, nothing else is going to work.
Yeah, I mean, I think the message that we entered this pandemic in was, let's take care of ourselves first, and then we'll focus on learning. And I think that was really the right way to begin. It's interesting in that as we finish out this 3-month period and start to reflect on what's worked and what hasn't, and in talking to many families, and we've sent out a few surveys and have gotten great data to really understand what's working and what's not. So, some are clamoring for more academics. Some are wanting to slow down. I've seen a lot of differentiation in terms of kind of where families are, and some of it really depends on I think on our family situations, on how much time do parents have to do teaching and learning with their kids. I mean, this is putting parents in a really different position than they have been before. If you have 2 working parents who don't have time to sit for 3 hours with a first grader to help them through it, it becomes pretty challenging. So I think as we know, I mean, I totally agree that we know that if the social emotional needs of a student are not met, nothing else is going to happen. So that is a number 1 priority. Our services and our ability to support those needs for students are based on in-person structures that, you know, in the absence of those, I think we've been struggling to figure out how do we support students when we don't see them. We see them virtually, but we don't see them in person, and a lot happens in person. So those are some of the tough questions we're going to be asking ourselves as we think about what structures we need in place next year to focus both on the social emotional learning and on academic advancement, because we don't want students kind of sitting in limbo for an entire year as we kind of wait this out.
Right. Great. Any other questions or comments for the team?
I have one more.
Mary.
Yeah, I just want to ask, is there any possibility as the state is opening up more and allowing more, you know, contact with people in small numbers with distance and all that, is there any way to focus on some of, so that every child is seen by somebody at least once a month, and then prioritize the kids who need to be seen more frequently? I mean, is that a possibility?
I think our thinking right now in terms of I mean, summer is its own planning organism. So we are talking about what's happening this summer, and we're continuing to work through the guidance from the state and our colleagues to determine what we can do for the summer. But I think very thinking long term, at least at the beginning, we're expecting to be able to do much more than that in late August, at least given the current trajectory in Vermont and what we're hearing. Obviously nobody knows yet what the guidance will be, but I'm expecting that we'll at least be in some kind of modified start where we're seeing much more than just one student at a time.
Okay. And my other question is regarding the technology, the internet access in more rural communities. Is there any way to have sort of satellite places in each community where there's better connections and families can sign time out to be in there, or maybe have multiple rooms opened up and an individual student can go into each of the rooms? just to give them better access? If this is obviously if we need to continue this into the fall.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we'll certainly be looking at that, whether it's, giving students access to some kind of rotation in the school as a hub. I mean, that's an obvious hub to go for internet access. Yeah, or figuring out other ways. It's interesting that we have a number of educators with kids who live in places like Salisbury and Shoreham and places that are having to rotate and take turns where their child will get on the internet, will have an hour lesson, then they go on, and so it's I think it's been a bit of a struggle for some. So that's something that we have to think about too.
Yeah, or who have to drive to the parking lot of the school and teach from their car, which we have somebody who regularly is doing that.
Yeah. And we won't even talk about Goshen.
No, we're good.
I also just want to say that whatever we do in the fall, I've been helping the nurses with the grocery program on Thursdays. And the thing that I've been struck by is whatever we do, it's this idea of person-to-person connection with the families that are going to need the help with this internet. Because even though you can provide them maybe with a better service, they're struggling with so many basic needs. It's hard to manage that, teach their kids. And so I think whatever we do from a learning perspective and from a support perspective, I think we're going to have those people that are like really there coaching the families while we can still have personal contact, even if we have to go back to more virtual. And I feel like in some ways, that's what a lot of the information we got from the different educators and support staff at the schools, the best examples were people that had those personal connections. So I think we're going to have to leverage that and prepare families individually, because it's hard to do it when you're also worried about food and all the other things families are struggling with.
So I wanted to just add that, yes, it's interesting that the results of our survey all came to fruition through this experience, that everything that we saw actually were things that we had to respond to. But at the same time, with the situation, there's been many silver linings. And one of the things that I have noticed has been that we've had the opportunity to team in ways that we hadn't teamed before. And we were able, with our school-based clinician and our guidance counselor, our nurse, we have weekly meetings, and we identify and have maintained contact with families to both be able to help them with their resources and their academic connection issues and, organizational pieces of trying to create a schedule that accommodates everybody's needs and meetings. I mean, that's one of the most challenging things about having multiple children at home is the schedule, because things have happened so differently for everybody. But what we did notice was that we created some really strong teams with families that before we did not find very accessible. And so at this point, I think that we have a great foundation that when we do go back to being in person, that we can continue to build. Mm-hmm. We have teachers who talk about the fact that they've worked very closely with parents during this time to be able to support their students' learning, and that they understand much better now some of the things that before were difficult to explain. And so I think that it just would be nice. It's not all, and definitely we still have holes, but I think it'd be nice to capture some of those real positives that have come out in making those connections and in emphasizing the fact that taking care of each other and taking care of ourselves was our priority. That it's really quite valuable, that it'd be nice to be able to harness that when we go back or when we go to our next stage. I wouldn't want to lose it.
Great point. Any other comments or questions on this content?
The only thing that it occurs to me, in particularly in listening to you, Fernanda, which is going back to your discussion earlier, Peter, about the recovery plan, and it's just a good reminder of bringing forward, it's not just focusing on, it's focusing on both on the assets as well as the struggles as a way to inform that planning.
And that's what we've got 4 days, we've got really 4 found days at the end of the year now to work with staff. A big part of that is going to be looking at both the leverage points and strengths and the challenges to think about how do we, I mean, frankly, some of it's going to be living with the challenges. We're not going to fix all the challenges. So it's accepting them, frankly, and figuring out how do we support people in the best ways that we can, in whatever the context is that we're handed, so to speak.
Mary?
I'm sorry, I have one more question. I know the summer is a really tough time for a lot of children who are in high-risk situations. And losing contact with schools during the summer always is very difficult for kids and staff, etc. I know, Peter, I talked with you about summer meals, and I know Brittany's working on that. But I understand Middlebury is going to be able to offer summer meals, but it does mean a pickup. Parents would have to come to pick it up. My question is regarding the outlying schools, because there the need is great. Is there some way we can partner with the Middlebury Summer Meals Program, which will be sponsored under Mary Johnson's program, to bring food to the communities outside of Middlebury?
I'm not sure you're saying in terms of transporting the food?
Yeah, transporting.
So we don't, I mean, right now our infrastructure is on Betcha, on our buses, which will end the week of June 8th, and kind of like the last student day. So I'm not sure there are other avenues, and Brittany could probably answer this maybe a little bit better because she's been more centrally working on this, but I'm not sure there are, other than maybe some kind of volunteer Meals on Wheels type of program to transport that. I'm not sure, but that could be something that we could talk to Mary Johnson about to see if they've put out feelers or have reached out to any of the available transportation options. I mean, I guess one would be a volunteer option.
I think it would even help if we just had a pickup at each school rather than or at several schools rather than just having to drive into Middlebury to do it. If there was a way to bring a box of meals that could then be picked up more locally, I think that would benefit families. I agree with Mary.
Yeah, there's a volunteer community corps. I can't remember it's not medical corps, but it's a group of volunteers. And I was on the Hunger Vermont Zoom call a couple weeks ago, and we talked about this, and they said that they felt that group would be interested in helping deliver meals to schools in the outlying districts, so that families then could have some connection and get food during the summer. Mary Johnson is doing a Zoom meeting. Susie Pigeon sent me the link today, just because she basically said if they had a number of how many families they think would be accessing this program, it would help them in determining how many hires that they have to have hired and the food they need to order. So.
And that's something, I don't know if we have that data yet. I mean, when we transitioned, or not that we don't have it, but I think we'd probably want to look at the numbers change for us from when we were running it standard, and when for example, during April break, when people came to pick up, the numbers dropped pretty significantly. Brittany, what were those numbers?
We had about 200 people come per day during April break, as opposed to around 800 deliveries that we were making.
I'll just add.
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Jerry.
I was just going to mention that we've had a program, for example, in Shoreham for years where food is distributed at the local library. Abby Adams has organized that. That might also be something to think about leveraging in some other outlying towns.
Yeah, and we're going to continue to work with Mary Johnson to kind of do the handoff, so to speak, as we move into the summer and our employees who are, primarily school year are gone, and Mary Johnson picks it up to help support that. So that we will connect with them, and as we continue to kind of figure out how we make this transition fluid and how we continue to have folks having access that need it.
Okay.
Great. Mary G, anything else?
No, I'll just stay connected as much as I can, and I'll communicate with Peter and Brittany. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Great. Thank you all very much. It was a great discussion. We really appreciate the opportunity to learn from your work and your insights. So really good stuff. Thank you very much.
So wellness crew, thank you so much. I'm going to move you back to attendee now, okay? And you don't have to stay, but you can.
I don't know. It's pretty exciting stuff.
It really is. Okay, so our next item is the audit report. We're going to start with a pop quiz on that.
Who wouldn't want to stay for this riveting piece of literature?
Okay, Brittany, take it away.
Okay, so this was actually presented to the Finance Committee several months ago, right before everything came to a grinding halt. So this was actually done over the winter, and then normally would be presented much earlier in the spring. So I don't want to belabor it a ton. So what I've provided you is the management letter, the actual financial reports, and then sort of my notes about the highlights. So the highlights are that we received what I would call a clean audit report. So we didn't have any material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies in our internal controls, and the auditors believe that our financial statements are presented without any material misstatements. In the management letter, the auditor identifies a few areas that didn't merit, a finding of a significant deficiency or a material weakness, but there were some opportunities for improvement. And there were three main areas. One was bank reconciliations. So some bank reconciliations were not completed in the month following receipt of the bank statement. This was related to staff turnover, which also coincided with my maternity leave. And we've since corrected that. It's important to note that there weren't any issues identified with the bank statements. It's just that we like to reconcile them in a timely fashion so that if there are issues, we can find and correct them. There's another suggestion related to cash disbursements. So the auditors found that in some cases, purchase orders were prepared after items had already been purchased. This is just part of trying to be compliant with the procedures that we already have in place. So we're performing additional training and monitoring to make sure that there's a compliance with those procedures. And then the last area was related to student activity funds. So this is a really common area of weakness, both for our district and for many school districts. So student activity funds are held at the school level. And right now for us, they're tracked on external software such as QuickBooks, or in some cases even on an Excel spreadsheet for some of the smaller schools. There aren't a lot of funds there. The main area that we have a lot of student activity funds are at the high school, where we have, athletics and other major funds like that. So the goal is to bring those funds onto eFinance, which is the accounting software that we use for the rest of the district, within the next year. So not this July, but either January or July. Those are sort of the two times to bring them on. So this would allow us to have more oversight of the funds and a more cohesive set of procedures. So those are the areas where we have some opportunities for improvement. There will always be opportunities for improvement, and we really value that we have the opportunity to, we have a relationship with our auditors that allows us to identify and discuss those things, and they help us come up with plans for improvement. Beyond that, there's some pages which I list that you may wish to review for more in-depth information. The part that I think is most important for all board members to read are pages 4 through 12. So that's the management discussion and analysis. And that's a really good summary of the audit and the financial position of the district. So if you don't read anything else, read pages 4 through 12. Any questions?
I would just add that I think year after year, I mean, what Brittany mentioned is really true, that when you get a good auditor, they help tighten your procedures and really work on operational fluidity and creating a stronger system. And I think I've seen that over the years. We've been with R.H.R. Smith for maybe 4 years now. Does that sound right?
5.
Yeah.
This might have been our 5th year.
Yeah. And each year we've taken recommendations. I mean, we tend to get pretty glowing remarks, and I think that reflects the great work of Brittany and her team. But we're also, I think, a learning organization, and I see Brittany and her team making changes and making things better, and I think you can't really ask for anything more, so kudos.
Thank you.
I would say that for sure. I mean, I'm always impressed with the answers are there when we need them.
Great. Well, thanks, Brittany. We appreciate that.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
Brittany, you among the pages you said to take a look at was just the one on long-term debt.
Sure.
Why were you highlighting that for us?
I just thought you might be interested because it has some pretty detailed bond schedules for the district. That's all.
And
none of those areas are areas that I think are areas of concern. They're just things that we sometimes get asked, well, how much debt does the district have? And so it's just handy knowledge.
So it lists a lot of bonds payable, but I assume that they're not for that many projects. It's just there are a number of different bonds that went to pay for a single project.
No, that's actually generally not the case. We just have, the bonds that we get are usually for 20 or 30 years. So many of these are old bonds that are nearly ready to retire. So our annual debt payments on bonds are only about $300,000. Some of them are very small. There's also a section where it lists leases and other agreements, and there's many more of those.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Brittany? Great. Thanks, Brittany. Appreciate it. And then lastly, Peter, under yours, financial update.
Yep. So Brittany's going to share a little bit and elaborate on her memo and some of the other information that we've been sharing. Before we do that, I just wanted to let all of you know that as we are going through contract period and working, obviously we're in negotiations, and you all have had updates from the negotiations team. The non-union staff members, which is all the central office, our food service folks, tech folks, and our principals, we're having to kind of figure out what makes sense for them as we're going through negotiations. So I wanted to let you all know, given where we are with the fiscal challenges ahead, the central office admins, which is me and Vicki, Caitlin, Brittany, and Will, have all decided to take 0% increase going into next year. We had actually, when we let our non-union members of ACSD know that, a few people stepped forward and voluntarily said that they would also take a 0%. For the non-union, other non-union staff members, we are giving them a letter of intent right now, which will be an increase, will be matched to whatever the negotiated agreement is with teachers. So I just wanted to give everybody an update on kind of how we're working at the central office through some of the challenges that we're facing right now.
Great. Thanks, Peter. And obviously, folks recognizing obviously the constraints from a financial perspective, while still being asked to do these Herculean things, it's just another testament, I think, to the great leadership team that you have in place and our ability to weather this storm. So we thank you for that acknowledgement and the approach that your team has taken.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great team. I'm looking at the team, but you can't see me looking at you. Brittany, do you want to talk a little bit more about the fiscal realities?
Sure. So I provided a memo, and that memo mostly outlined an attachment from the JFO Joint Fiscal Office, where they sort of look at what they think we're going to end this year with, and then some different scenarios for FY21. And it's admittedly can be a little challenging to look at. So essentially, they're thinking that for FY21, they outline a scenario where they would cover the deficit with property taxes, which the legislature has already signaled will not happen. That's not a route that they're willing to go. So there's another scenario of what the deficit would look like if tax rates were to stay as they're currently proposed, which is about $167 million deficit. And then the last column over uses some of the ESSER funds, which are the elementary and secondary school relief funds. You know what I mean? The ESSER funds, where they would recapture a portion of those, 5%, I think. To cover 5% of the education payment. So essentially, we would have our education fund payments shorted to recapture some of those funds. It's similar to the healthcare clawback that we saw a couple of years ago. And even with that, there would be about a $70 million deficit. So there have been a number of proposals and ideas that have been floated to deal with that. Some of that includes a short-term borrowing. Most recently, you probably saw that the governor's administration proposed requiring school districts to revote budgets for the second half of the fiscal year and requiring significant reductions. That was met, I think, it was a pretty icy reception from the legislature. So as you know, 80% of school budgets are wages and benefits. Most of those are covered by collective bargaining agreements. And in those collective bargaining agreements, there are deadlines for RIFs, which is a reduction in force, and they have all already passed. So if we were required to make reductions, it's pretty unclear where those reductions could be made. So we may be asked to reduce in FY21, but we expect the majority of the pressure to come in the FY22 budget and beyond. So it's going to make the budget development process important to start even earlier this year. We also are foreseeing that this isn't going to be a one-year problem. It's going to take many years to rebound from this, and then, figure out where we go. So across the nation, every state is grappling with this. I haven't seen, any coverage that has indicated that a state is going to get away unscathed. So, at the same time that California, for example, is feeling that it's going to actually take 20% more than the current year to open safely because they feel they're going to need to add bus routes and other social distancing measures. But there are $14 billion in budget cuts being proposed by Governor Newsom statewide in California. Colorado is looking at cutting 5 to 10%. Massachusetts is looking at 10 to 25%. New York City schools have just gotten $800 million in budget cuts. So this is something that's definitely not unique to Vermont. Of course, each state has a different funding system, and they're typically dissimilar to Vermont. Some states are actually voting on budgets right now, but it's sort of, universal that there will be reductions that need to be made. We just don't know exactly what form those will take yet, and if there'll be significant consequences for FY21 or if they'll be largely reserved for FY22. Did you have anything to add, Peter?
Yeah, I would just say, along the lines of thinking about FY21 and 22, as Brittany mentioned, a number of states have the ability to make moves on spending for FY21, and they're doing so now because the revenue's not there. Vermont is in a very different situation where there really aren't many levers that can be manipulated right now to get FY21 spending down because all budgets are already passed, or a lot of them are already passed, and Brittany mentioned the challenges to making any changes in FY21 on our current budget. So the risk, I think, for Vermont is that we're not making really any changes going into 21. So our hole in 22 is going to be a little bit bigger because we didn't make any adjustments in 21 like most other states have.
Oh, we also participated, Peter and I were both in a call, on a call, and JFO was presenting some of this data. And they indicated that they actually feel like this is probably more on the best case scenario side, you know, assuming that everyone pays their sales and use tax on time and their property taxes on time, their income taxes on time. So, you know, it's still, there's still projections being done, but they think this is probably on the better end of the spectrum.
Brittany?
Yes.
Yeah, you know, when you presented this to Victoria and I the other day, you know, I think we just wanted the board to understand that, you know, I mean, you mentioned 10 to 25% in Massachusetts. A 10% reduction in a budget is catastrophic for systems like schools, as far as I can see. I mean, that would require, well, I mean, whatever you use as your base number per faculty member, that's a lot of faculty members, irrespective of all the other things that you would eliminate before you even started to do that. So maybe we are, by the nature of the system, not going to be as affected catastrophically this year, but when you figure up the budget for next year or for the 22, it's just plain dire, frightening. I don't even know how to comprehend it. Now, I know Peter mentioned, you know, there are other districts in the country that have gone through these types of things before by the nature of their school funding systems. Vermont, by its smaller natures and smaller class sizes and everything else, we never had to go through this. But I think it's going to be really, really, really difficult.
Yeah, it would not be surprising for me and for my colleagues, I think, have similar sentiments. It would not be surprising to see our funding system move toward a more top-down rather than bottom-up, which is how we are now. Most other states essentially give an allocation per student, and then there are some other mechanisms to raise funds. But in Vermont, it's very much we say, you know, locally what we need. And I think that we're going to see that system, you know, the state move away from that system because we'll just no longer be able to bear the costs.
If I could chime in for a moment, just to update folks on the latest, and that is that today the House Ways and Means Committee voted out a yield bill, which is what towns use to set the tax rate, and it's really based on the world pre-COVID. And so that's why, you know, FY21 will be covered on a wing and a prayer. The prayer being that the federal government loosens the rules on the $1.25 billion or comes up with some other money to help fund the revenue losses. But it also just sort of recognizes that this can't be solved in 1 year, and that if the federal money doesn't come through, it'll be solved by borrowing to cover. And of course, that borrowing needs to get paid back. So the warning about FY22 is true. But I'd still back it up 1 more year and say that in FY21, we need to prepare for FY22 in that any savings we can find along the way to build up our reserves is going to make us that much better off going into the next year. So really, you know, we can't sit back and say, oh, well, the state has go ahead and said they'll cover the budget that was approved. We need to be building our reserves.
That was the uplifting portion of the meeting.
Yeah.
I want to back up even further and just say how important it is and how significant it is, the decision by the non-union folks to, or for the executive staff and leadership to take the zero increase in their pay. The symbolism behind that is very significant and very appreciative.
Very much so. Any other questions or comments, Peter, on this? Peter B?
I don't think so. I mean, I just think it's going to be a topic that we're going to really need to be thinking about. You know, we talked earlier tonight about our planning for FY21, and you know, as we think about the needs and services for students, and as we start to build some of these structures, we're certainly going to have to be filtering it through this fiscal lens too.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's where it's going to be that much more important that we're really clear about what's important, what we believe, and being value driven as we have to make some of these hard decisions.
Super. Well, Brittany, as always, thank you and your team for your diligence and attention to all of this. It's greatly appreciated.
Thanks.
Okay, we're going to jump to the report of the board. I'm going to make a little audible here. I believe we have some folks from Ripton who've been waiting on the call. Peter, is that correct?
Yep.
Great.
Yeah,
so we're
I believe Allison's here, so I'm going to
Yeah.
move her over
Jump
to
them up.
panelist.
Perfect.
And I'm going to hand it off to Brittany to talk a little bit about, to kind of introduce Allison and kind of the work that's happened thus far.
Sure. So we, this goes back, you know, quite some time. There's been some back and forth and trying to figure out where to go with this. And finally, we decided it just made sense to bring Allison in. She can speak to it really well. So there was a proposal. We initially got a proposal to release a covenant on some land that abuts Ripton Elementary School to construct a new salt shed for Ripton. And then we received a request to also change the boundary line a little bit. And so based on that request, we think that it makes sense for Allison to present to you so that she can speak to it much better than I can. So I'm going to turn it over to Allison. There were some materials in your packet that Allison provided, so you can reference those. Allison?
Okay, start my video. I don't know if it's starting. I hit start my video.
You're
were
great.
there.
You were there. Thank you,
Oh,
Allison.
I am? Okay, I can't see me or any of you.
Oh.
Oh.
Let me click the Zoom thing again. Okay, now you're back.
Can you see us?
Yeah. So sorry to have to come to you with this when you have so much else to deal with. But we have this grant to build a new sand and salt shed. We don't have a shed right now. We have the sand is in an open pile next to the middle branch of the Middlebury River. And the site is in a floodplain and the sand gets washed into the river. So after many years of trying to get funding for this, we did. We have a $356,000 grant. It included that we needed to buy a site. And we looked all over town for a site and the select board settled on this one. It's pretty tight. There is a map in your packet and I can hold it up. And so that red piece is what we're asking for from the district. But I'll address Brittany's first thing about the deed restrictions. The parcel of land we wish to use has all these covenant restrictions in the deed. They're in several deeds from the 1970s when what I'm told is people were trying to prevent communes and mobile home parks from locating in town. So it prohibits subdivision and any non-residential structure. So those are the two things. The school parcel happens to bear an interest in those because that land was part of this whole Waterbury subdivision that had all these restrictions. So Ren Barlow has been our attorney and he identified those. And then as we held public meetings, people came in with concerns about the view from the street. And that led to the wish to set the building back a little further from the road and allow for a larger area for planting and screening. So that's our second request for the boundary adjustment with the school. And any questions or you want me to go on with more?
I just had a question. I know last time the board spoke about this, one of the concerns was how close the sand pile or salt pile would be to the school well.
Oh, it's very far away. The wells, it's way far away from the isolation distance from the well. I could get you the number of feet, but that's on the other side of the school building. And I have looked at those maps, and the engineers did. Everybody, there was a lot of environmental review of the site. We had to go through the whole, what they call the NEPA process. So we just wrapped up with the state review. So one of the things that does constrict the site is that there's a wetland on the south side. So that's why we couldn't go over in that direction more and had to nudge toward the school parcel. But yeah, it is clear, very clear from that public, a very clear far distance from the public water supply.
Thank you.
And the sand will all be in a shed. It will be fully enclosed. The floor will be concrete coated to seal it further. There'll be concrete block walls about 6 feet up, and then the dome. So the idea is it doesn't go anywhere.
Remember that one of the other questions that came up in our previous discussion was, and I know we talked about this at town meeting too, which is and if you could just share what the pattern of the traffic and the sound of the trucks and the if there's going to be any interference with the school day kind of thing.
No, I mean, basically sand gets hauled for 2 weeks in the fall into the shed. And then trucks will be loaded inside the shed when there's snow or ice. And they start really early in the morning. So they go out to try to get the roads clear for the school bus. So they'll be done before school. And they do their afternoon route too, timed for the school bus departures. So in the memo, I did summarize the noise. It's just seen, the road commissioner's view is there really isn't much traffic. It's just during that time when sand is hauled to town, they typically have 2 trucks coming. And then, so they'll be backing into the shed, dumping the sand, leaving, going back, and they don't work through the night doing that. They stop 3 or 4 o'clock. But I'm sure we could, if there was any problem with when the school buses were leaving and when those trucks were coming and going, we could work that out for that sand delivery time. And then the snow and ice time is pretty much as needed.
And Peter, first, thank you, Allison, for taking the time to support this request with this information. We appreciate it very much.
You're welcome.
Peter, I think one of the things that the board had chatted about last time was access to expertise from a board perspective to provide us with some level of insight in how we should be thinking about this. Do we have a way to submit this type of request and get some expertise back?
Yeah, I think we do. I mean, interestingly, Ren, who is working for the town of Griffin, is also who worked for us as we went through unification, and he did a lot of the assessment of all the properties in ACSD. So there's a conflict of interest there with him. So we have other counsel, I think, that we could reach out to. I think the other piece of this is the environmental impact as well, which I think having counsel review that documentation would also be helpful. Allison, you mentioned the plot was moved back as a means for screening, so it couldn't be seen from the road.
Yeah.
Can it not move left or south?
No, because there needs to be a wetland buffer. It's right up against the setback from the wetland buffer. So there's a class 2 wetland that we have to stay 50 feet apart, 50 feet away from.
Okay.
And I can share all the environmental review documents with anyone you want.
Okay.
So we had, there was a state.
No, go ahead, Allison. I'm sorry.
I was going to say the state wetland specialist looked at the site. There was an archaeological and historic review. And it's been through every state agency possible.
We can appreciate
Except
that.
maybe the Department of Education.
We can appreciate that. Just from a board perspective, I think one thing that's important is to know what you don't know. And so getting, some eyes on this that has a level of expertise that I don't think, or I know I personally don't have or hasn't been able to just sit up from a board view would be important. So unless anyone on the board has any other questions, I think, and Peter Conlon, you can help me with, from a point of order, how to accomplish this. I think my recommendation would be to move this to ask Peter and his team to have someone from the district find an expert that could provide us with a perspective on the district's position.
Question, is there a timeline on this for you folks?
Yeah, I mean, we want to move along and get this thing built.
It strikes me this is something that you folks want to have happen sooner rather than later. So I think it's a wise thing to ask somebody to review the paperwork and so on for it. I wonder if the board could take a vote on the assumption that nothing peculiar, unusual, strange, and prohibitive will come up given the review that this project has already had. And if it did, then obviously it would have to be postponed. But I have a feeling that Ripton really, probably folks need to move on this, right?
Yes. I mean, I think it's unlikely construction can happen this year. We thought we might be able to finish site acquisition and maybe the site preparation. I mean, it had been hoped that we would have the shed complete and the sand stored, but it's...
Okay, but before you can begin preparation, you have to have an answer from the school board.
Yeah, it would, we would wish to, yes.
Yes.
Jen?
So two things. So regarding the time, of course, it's always great to do things sooner rather than later, but does the grant expire at a certain date?
It does not, but the costs will keep rising probably, so we, might need more funding. If it
we know that. Second, there was two other pieces of land that were potential that may not be next to a school. And I know that this was seen as the preferable site, but is there a reason why the other two could not be options?
Yeah, one of them, well, we'd have to drive by this, both of those would have to drive past the school. That was seen as less ideal. One of them, the current property owner doesn't really want to do that. The other, turns out it is in the school's well isolation zone. It's the field across the street. And that owner had originally really wanted the town to acquire it, but the well thing doesn't work there.
Thank you.
And Allison, did I hear you correctly in that from a timeline perspective, you're probably not in a position right now to get this thing built this year, correct?
I'm kind of guessing at that. I mean, I had thought we could get some site work started, and it would probably depend on the weather in the fall.
Okay.
How much could be done.
Great. So given that, then I think it's probably, and obviously we want to do this as quickly as possibly, but I think our ability to kind of move this forward, getting that expertise, and then us having an opinion as a board would probably be appropriate, unless anyone had any other concerns.
I'll just mention it's a really small area. It's write it down.
0.068, I think.
Yeah, 0.068.
Yeah, 0.068 or something. Correct.
I think my concern isn't as much the property to be taken, it's just the closeness to the school of, you know, like you're saying, you were saying that the salt near the well wouldn't be healthy, but there just may be other environmental factors that maybe, like Mary said, we don't know what we don't know. So just making sure that somebody else is looking into those things so we don't make a decision that is going to harm the student.
I'll just add that if that land isn't an option, well, the select board will just move it back near the road and not deal with having as much screening.
Gotcha.
You know, it will still go on that next to the school parcel.
Okay.
We have to do two things. We have to release the covenant,
Yeah.
right? And, or you're asking us for two things.
Right.
The covenant and the, okay. So is the board, I'm just trying to, as Peter and I think about who we might engage to look at this, are you primarily asking, you know, a legal counsel to look at this sort of from a, you know, a liability stance for the district, or like to identify what potential issues might be in the future? Or are you wanting us to engage somebody to do environmental studies beyond?
No, I think
Okay.
it's at least for me, I think the environmental study, I'm assuming,
Okay.
you know, we're going to rely on that expertise that has been presented within the report.
Great. Thank you.
And I would also say that this is such a small piece of property, and if there is liability to the school environmentally, obviously Ripton is in this together. You know, I mean, it's a school and it's a municipal property. But I also, I don't want to spend a lot of money getting all sorts of environmental stuff from the school board side of it. Okay,
Right.
so I think this may be just as easy as possible, and let's get this done. I don't think I don't want to spend a lot.
I apologize. I was flipping in and out. My internet kept going away, so I missed the initial discussion. I think what we're hearing from Allison is that she'd like an indication, at least from the board, that barring some unforeseen issue, that we take a position that says, if we're ready to go forward with it, awaiting further word, but just some strong indication where we're headed on this. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would. The V-Trans project manager would love that, and so would the engineering consultant. I'm sure.
Yeah, I guess I would say that, you know, based on what we've read, the fact that this proposal has sort of been out there and existing for a while, I'm comfortable giving sort of a preliminary, we're comfortable with this, we just would like to do one last piece of due diligence or something like that, and then, you know, have a firm sign off next meeting.
Oh, that would be great if you could take it up at the next meeting.
I would support that. I think we need to move on this.
Is that a motion, Peter?
Well, like I said, I came in late, so I'm not quite sure where things were standing. There was already a motion on the table.
What you have said much more cogently is kind of where I started out. And it seems to me that Ripton would like to move this as quickly as possible. I'm certainly, if they've got an opportunity to screen it from the road, that's to everybody's advantage, I believe. And yeah, let's do minimal due diligence regarding any sort of legal issues there might be from the school board, and let's carry on and vote it the next time around.
If I could make a money-saving suggestion, the last time something like this came up, it was giving up a covenant on some on land that abutted the middle school property, which must go back 10 years or so. And to keep the cost down, we actually asked the lawyer for one of the parties to sort of say, hey, come on, you're a member of this community, give us, let us know what's going on. So I don't know if Ripton's got a lawyer that they could weigh in on, but you know, in a spirit of sort of trust and cooperation, it's a great way to save money.
Ren Barlow is our attorney, and he has said he would represent the town in this manner rather than the school district. So I'm happy to and I'm sure he'd be happy to talk with any of you. But if you want someone else, he had said you would need to look outside.
So I think, sorry.
Peter?
No, you go ahead, Peter.
I think Brittany and I can meet and kind of talk through this and expedite something that doesn't cost a lot, that can kind of look at the liability and from the board's perspective and come back at the next meeting.
Great.
Do it.
And who was going to, I'm a little bit, I don't see what an indication does for one, honestly. Work's not going to get started until we make a formal vote. So I don't know, that's just my own, that's my.
Maybe Allison, do you have an opinion if we give you giving you an indication that we're fine with this, barring any problem? Does that help at all, given the fact that we'll meet again in 3.5 weeks or 4 weeks?
No, I don't think you have to do anything formal for me. You've had your discussion, and that'll be on the record. And
great.
So thank you. And if there's anything else I can provide, just let me know, or Peter and Brittany reach out.
Perfect. Well, Allison, thank you so much for pulling us all together and providing us with this, the resources to have a better understanding of what we were talking about. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Probably send along the environmental documents.
Perfect.
To cover
That would be great.
Thank you.
Allison. Good night.
Good night. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Great. So next up, discussion committee updates. We've had a couple, I think most of the committees have met prior to this board meeting, so we wanted to take time to kind of just get a sense of what's currently on plate and how we're working through it. So each of the chairs, if we wanted to report out, why don't we, Chip, do you have a question?
I don't have a question. I'm just saying that the Finance Committee met. Victoria and I, Betty was not there, and everything that that Brittany talked about is what we talked about. That's our report.
Great. Victoria.
Yeah, so the Facilities Committee met, and I guess the last time we spoke about Facilities Master Plan at a board meeting, we had talked about how we were going to put it on hold due to the fact that we can't engage the community and the environment was just too tumultuous to think about how and when we would move forward. I'm not sure we've gotten a huge amount of clarity around what the future holds, but as Brittany reported, we do know that it's going to be pretty ugly financially. So we spoke about how it feels like the right time to take the scenarios that would involve a bond off the table. And the Facilities Committee agreed that that would seem an appropriate move. Well, for obvious reasons, it feels like in this environment, it would be foolish to try to go out for a bond that would never get voted. So we've decided Brittany and Peter are going to focus on building out what the 3 and 4 school plans look like from programmatic perspective, from actual bodies and seats. How does everybody fit, and how do all the services that we want to provide fit? From a transportation perspective, from what buildings need what kind of upgrades, maintenance, staffing, all of that good stuff. So their work is going to focus on the 3 and 4 school models rather than the 1 and 2 school models that we had originally thought we'd look at with from David Epstein's plan. Peter, was there? Did I miss anything there?
No, I don't think so. I think you summarized it well. I mean, I would just reiterate that I think given what we talked about in terms of FY21 and FY22, I think this is work that probably the Planning and Engagement Committee will be talking about momentarily. We're in a kind of quote unquote new normal, and we need to think about how do we engage the community in this context. We can't wait for everything to be back to normal, because we're going to have to be making some, what we believe to be some pretty challenging decisions, as Brittany mentioned, that affect people. And we need to be thinking about in this kind of in-person and virtual world that we're living in now, we need to figure out how do we make these decisions together. So I think that's one of the bigger challenges I think that we face, and one that the master plan committee was talking about a lot in the meeting last week.
Were you thinking in terms of timeline that this work would be the summer work, and then we'd have, you know, discussion or reveal around what you've come up with in line with fall meetings that we would hope be in person, or did you get that specific, or what were you thinking in terms of timeline? Well, and maybe it's best case and not best case, I don't know, but.
You know, maybe Peter can speak to that. We didn't speak specifically about sort of when a great reveal would be. I think Peter and Brittany are just diving into how much work needs to be done, and what, you know, they're getting their arms around the information that they need to gather to really figure out what the programming would look like. But Peter, maybe you can speak more to that.
Yeah, I mean, my major concern is that if FY22 presents itself as we think it will, and either the state mandates certain percentage cut, or the formula changes in some significant way to suppress spending, we're going to have to be making decisions. You know, we're talking December, which is right around the corner. So that's my I talked about reactivity earlier tonight, and I don't want to have all of us be in a place of reactivity when we get to that point, not having kind of thought about what the future is. If we're asked to do a 10% cut, or, you know, whatever that number is, you know, we're talking millions and millions of dollars. So I just think it behooves us to be as organized as possible, so that when we get to that point, we're doing it with, as I mentioned, with as many people behind us looking ahead at the challenges and focusing on what's important and funding that.
Right. I would say, you know, my vision would be that we have something that we're comfortable with in case the environment necessitates a move for the 22-23 school year. Right. We don't want to be caught off guard with no plan for that year, and then have it dropped on us that we got to do something. So that's my feeling.
That would be the 21-22, I think you're talking about, right?
This is 20. Oh, right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. It felt like such a long period of time. I missed the whole. Haven't we been doing this forever?
It feels like it, yeah.
I missed the whole year.
Maria, what is the cadence then for the facilities committee moving forward? How are you guys in Peter and Brittany's world? How is that going to work? Are you meeting every month, or how is that?
You know, right now our schedule is in sync with the other committee.
Okay.
Meeting times, and I think that you know, I trust that as Peter and Brittany get into it, we can add additional meetings as needed.
Okay. And where's David, like our interaction with Epstein's group at this point?
Right now, really it falls to Brittany and me to figure out what it looks like for ACSD. I mean, David's done a lot of the work in terms of the design, so I think David probably would come back after Brittany and I have done this work, and probably done more community engagement. And I think that's the place where, you know, as we think about committees, that's where the facilities master plan, or the facilities committee and the planning engagement committee again are kind of intertwined here. Because as soon as we have that information, the next step is now what? How do people engage on this?
Okay. Super helpful. Any other questions on that? Mary.
Okay. Yeah, the policy committee met prior to this meeting. And we, back in February, which is the last time we met, there were only two of us. There was Vicki and I, and we drafted a policy for personnel recruitment and hiring and all that practices. And we had a draft to present, but Suzanne brought up an issue around a statute that she's aware of that we need to do some background checking on that. So I'll be contacting the Vermont School Boards Association regarding that policy. We used their model policy to draft ours, and so the statute was not part of that. So we'll be looking at that. Vicki also brought up a couple of areas that we may want to look at regarding student privacy and student records around this remote virtual learning that she is aware of. So we're also going to be checking with the Vermont school boards whether they're, you know, looking at policy regarding that as well. So we hope to have the draft for personnel ready for the next board meeting for you to review. And then throughout the summer, we're going to meet several times to try to get some of these other policy ideas kind of fleshed out if we need to pursue them. So that's where we are.
Great. And I know Victoria has mentioned, and I think even in light of the wellness report that we received today, the center point of transportation as a catalyst that can turn something good or bad seems to be super important. And so how we're thinking about that from a policy level is probably another one to
that was also on our list. Transportation. Yeah.
Great. And then Amy, you guys are going to meet subsequent, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that part of it was to sort of get the updated, sort of see where things are, and then I think that's exactly what, and to find a time when we can convene with Betty being out and but also getting central office. But that's exactly why I was asking the question, because it's sort of a two-part. There's both making sure that the public really understands the financial implications while the scenarios are being developed. So by the time they're revealed, you know, it's an in-sync picture. And frankly, I'm hopeful that because it's going to be about the educational, it'll actually be inspiring, given the kinds of conversations we've been having about the needs that we do want to meet. So anyway, yes, that's our plan. We'll try to find a time next week or the week after.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so next up was to discuss our summer meeting schedule that needs to look like. I think there's a couple of things to get a sense from folks on. Number one is just the cadence of the board meetings over the next, I think, Peter, you said we usually take July off. Is that correct? Peter B?
Yeah, that's been kind of the standard over the last, I guess, for a long time.
But given kind of...
Except last summer, right?
But given kind of where we are and the movement and I think some of the financial constraints that we're going to start to become more and more apparent, what do we think this summer should look like that would best support Peter and his team? And then also, how do we think about the retreat? And trying to do a retreat on a Zoom meeting probably is not in anyone's list of top 10 things they want to do. And so how do we think about a retreat that would be beneficial and significant? So the next board meeting that we have scheduled is for, I believe, June 22nd is the next one on the list, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't know what folks are thinking with regard, or if folks have an opinion on doing a meeting June, July, and then trying to figure out, hopefully a way in August that we would be able to come together to do an in-person retreat, if that's possible.
I support that plan. I mean, we haven't, given that we haven't met as often anyway, and the information is so critical, I think meeting through the summer makes sense. And we are, I think we've already been approved to gather groups of 25 or fewer if we practice social distancing. So it's not outside of the realm of, what's already being allowed, to consider the in-person retreat, assuming things continue to move in the right direction.
Right.
I would
Jen Newseeder?
Thanks. I think that I'm not sure what the rules are going to be, but I think it is smart to think maybe we can do something. Maybe we'll be outside, which would be lovely. 2 notes from the time that we did meet last summer. We got a little bit of flack, or people maybe felt left out when we made decisions in the summer. So I think it's important to me to keep the momentum going, but maybe be thoughtful about if we actually have to take action on something and make a vote that maybe people feel like they're not around to be prepared for. And second, I guess just personally, I don't mind meeting. I'm just hanging out here all the time. It's great. But I wouldn't want to add work to central office to kind of prepare stuff for us. So if we can be helpful to the central office to keep things moving, great. But in maybe a less formal way so that there isn't, a lot of preparation just for us.
Chip, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just also had a comment relative to just the format of committee meetings. If there's just 2 people or 4 people or 3 people, I mean, I understand the Zoom works okay and we can use it or not use it, but I think as we get into, if there is some sort of guidance as to numbers of people, socially distanced meeting, that it may be that we'll have some flexibility, not totally being Zoomed. And I guess I'd leave that up to whoever's figuring out. But I just don't want to be feeling like we're going to be Zooming all the time on everything when in fact we could actually have some flexibility. That's my piece.
Peter C?
Good point. Our committee meetings are small, and maybe we can hold them in person. I just want to say that the July meeting will be important. Hopefully, just from a negotiations point of view, at some point we're either going to have a contract to ratify or need guidance from the board if we're at impasse.
Okay, great.
And with that, if I just could, while we're done here, I would like to just provide a negotiations update and maybe ask for a little guidance in an executive session once we wrap it here. And I promise it'll be quick.
Great. Any other comments from a meeting cadence perspective? Peter B?
Yeah, I mean, I think July would be helpful just because, a normal July, we're kind of through with the last year and we're kind of slowly gearing up at the central office. This year is going to look really different. And I think meeting in our work in July is going to probably involve more hands than it normally does, as we're expecting to get more guidance from the state in July. So I think, normally July is quiet and people are traveling. I think it's going to be kind of prime time for us, actually.
Okay. Great. So then why don't we plan on securing the date for a single meeting in July? I guess that would be the 4th Monday of July. Does that make sense?
The 27th.
The 27th? Great. And then maybe by June, we can decide at the June meeting how we want to, we'll plan on doing something in August from a retreat perspective and figure out, maybe June will have us have some better insight into what that format can and will look like.
It may also make sense to do a retreat and a regular meeting in August as we get started.
Yep.
I agree.
So do you want to do the retreat first then and then the regular meeting?
Reverse.
Real.
Regular meeting and then retreat, I would think.
It depends on what we're doing with the retreat. I mean, if we don't have a topic yet or a guidance yet.
And we don't know what's going to be happening at the end. I mean, I think Peter Burrows is correct, is that we just don't know what the roller coaster is going to be looking like at that point. And, well, that's my opinion.
I think we should just schedule a regular meeting, and then maybe Mary, you and I and Peter can think about what a potential retreat might look like, and then we could send out a doodle poll or something to schedule a date. We think that we can come up with something that's going to be.
Yeah, one of the things just to think about, I think we had a conversation at the last meeting that having a retreat and then having work come out of that retreat, having another opportunity for a board meeting after that work before you kick off school kind of gives you a runway into taking action from that retreat, as opposed to let's do a board meeting, now we go to retreat, and now we're right into the school year. So, you know, just something for us to noodle on, I suppose.
I would just chime in that Peg's point is well taken. The later the retreat, the more information we might have.
True, absolutely.
But again, we can. I think we can probably be nimble on the fly as time goes on.
So we'll huddle with Victoria and Peter B, and then we'll decide how we'll get that info out. Any other comments on calendar? Great. Next up, food service bids. Brittany.
Yay. Okay. So these next two items are definitely on the lighter side of what we've talked about and more in line with sort of like business as usual. So the way that the food service management company bids work per USDA is that you contract with a company for 1 year periods. So every time we do a contract, it's for 1 year. And we have the option to renew it up to 4 times. So you can be with one company for 5 years before you go back out to bid. And the bid process is very lengthy, and it's a really thick document that's prescribed by the USDA and the state. And we have these huge thick binders where people respond. So we had completed, or we are completing, our 5th year with Abbey Group, and so we were obligated to go back out to bid. And we received 2 bids, one from Abbey Group, which is our current company, and one from Cafe Services, which ACSD has used in the past. The Abbey Group is a Vermont-based company. They tend to have more Vermont districts. Cafe Services has a heavier presence in New Hampshire. And we go through a scoring sheet. Myself and Bill Waller looked at this, and we do have some leeway in how we do the scoring sheet, but we do have to give, we're required to give price the biggest weighting, the heaviest weighting. And so the contract that we currently have for the 3 Middlebury schools is basically a break-even contract. There's a small guaranteed return for MUMS and MUHS, and a guarantee that we won't have to subsidize. I think it's more than $12,000 at Mary Hogan. So it comes out to about break-even guarantee. But those contracts are no longer allowed for the USDA, so everything now is based on a price per meal, and it makes it a lot harder to sort of figure out what it's going to look like, because a lot of it's based on participation. But Abbey Group, our current vendor had a lower price per meal. It was significantly lower for breakfast, I think like over 30 cents. And for lunch, it was 12 cents cheaper, and their management fee was the same per meal. So, you know, the other pieces of the bid were fairly similar. They're both able to offer a lot of local sourcing. They both had reasonably good references in districts that I'm familiar with. They are able to provide a salad bar. Some of the notes that I took for Abbey Group is going to introduce a stay-to-school program for seafood. They have a cook-to-order station where they do things like ramen and grain bowls, an omelet bar. They are also engaged in some taste tests involving Middlebury College, which has been popular at Mary Hogan. And so based on that, the fact that they're our current vendor and that their price is lower, I would recommend that we continue or that we enter into a new agreement with Abbey Group for the 2021 school year. I'd also add that they have been pretty phenomenal with the meal program that we've been doing during the school closure. I actually had more compliments on the quality of food during this period than we typically get during the school year. So I feel, you know, confident moving forward with that. Somebody, Peter C., are you raising your hand on purpose? Because it says you're raising your hand.
I am. I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Abbey Group lost money on their contract with us, right?
So sometimes.
Not every year.
Not every
Not
year.
every year.
It depends.
Okay. And does the current bid sort of reflect them upping things so that they don't run that risk again, or is it in line with what we've been paying already?
It's similar to what we've been paying already. So other districts that I've talked to that have entered into these new agreements where it's based on our price per meal generally say they think that it's more favorable for the management companies. But based on the enrollment and the participation projections that we've done, we think it will be similar in line to what we've been doing now.
That's great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Sure.
Great. So I believe then we need a motion to approve the bid for. Chip.
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Second. Any other comments? All those in favor, raise your hand. Great. That was everybody's hand.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brittany.
Thanks.
All right. I think that's all we had of the board.
So there was actually another food service piece, Mary. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
It was the food service director proposal.
Oh, yep, there it is.
So this is another piece to food service, and I know that it's late, so I'm going to try to be super concise about this. So the 3 Middlebury schools have a management company, which we just talked about, and the other six schools have run an in-house program. And what that means is that we hire our own staff, and those staff do their own menu planning and all their own paperwork. But we don't have a director, a central director over that, which is somewhat unusual. And so we're losing out on a lot of efficiencies, and the food service staff at the schools are often producing really delicious food. The compliance is pretty poor. So there's a lot of paperwork and things related to food service that we're required to do by the USDA and by the state. And the staff that we have just aren't able to do it in the time that they have. Their whole day is spent, prepping and serving food. And so we have talked, at length for years, I think, even prior to me, about looking into what it would mean to maybe expand on the partnership that Mount Abe and Addison Northwest have, which is really well known throughout the state. It's a partnership. And so we began to look into that a little bit more this year. And through that exploration, it was determined that they don't have the capacity to just take us on, but they are willing to provide us some, like a consultation or some sort of collaborative in terms of running district-wide PD, like county-wide PD, which is really great. But beyond that, they helped us to look at our finances and our budget and our participation. And we believe that it will be beneficial for the district to hire a central director for the first year, for next year, to oversee the 6 schools that have an in-house program. And so that person would oversee the menu preparation, all the procurement, the paperwork. They would do the ordering. So we don't do any real bulk ordering right now. We lose out on a lot of efficiencies that way. And then moving into FY22, we would cease working with a management company, and that director would take this next year to build the program at Middlebury, and we would just have an in-house program at Middlebury. Typically, when you move from a management company to an in-house program, your participation increases quite a bit. That happened at Mount Abe and Addison Northwest. They think that we can increase participation 10 to 15%. And so when that happens at Middlebury, where the numbers are quite large, that can bring in several $100,000 of additional revenue for the program. And so we recognize the importance of having healthy, nutritious food for kids, and we also recognize the financial constraints that we've talked about ad nauseum during this meeting. And so we wanted to find a way to make this at least cost neutral. So we think that in year 1, there would be about a $55,000 gap that we would need to cover. But we think that within 3 years, this could be very cost neutral, and we would achieve some efficiencies and savings in ordering and potentially staffing and the way we use our staff. And there is the potential to use our staff more effectively to do nutrition education for kids. We also could look at expanding our programming to do summer meals, which we definitely don't have the capacity to do right now. And there's other programs like At-Risk Supper that Mount A participates in that generally bring in more revenue. So we think that within 3 years, we can make this program cost neutral, but it is going to require an investment in year 1. So the proposal is that we would move forward with hiring a food service director for the 2021 school year, and that they would build toward a fully in-house program for FY22.
And just to add a couple things, you know, those of you that have been around for a while know that we've talked about this for many years, both on our smaller boards, you know, pre-unification and post-unification. So it's something that we've been moving towards for a long time. And I think, you know, one of the apprehensions we've had has been the cost. And, you know, when we initially did research, when ID4 originally did research on this, like 6 years ago, I remember hearing about what the cost could be from where we were at that point, and it was hundreds of thousands of dollars per year more. Since that time, I think we've gotten a better handle on what we're actually spending. We understand, because we now have more central office support for food service than we ever had before, we've come to realize where we need to provide more support and where some of the gaps were. I mean, previously, every school was on its own. And if you look at the turnover in our food service positions, it's quite high. That I think it was last year or 2 years ago, we were hiring 6 of our 7 food service positions for elementary. So for a number of reasons, it has been something that we haven't put our collective kind of systems brains on until now, and it feels like this is a really good time to do it. You know, I agree with Brittany that I think it can be a cost neutral, and it's a huge value add as well. We think that the numbers, and you know, in looking at Middlebury in 21-22, we believe that we could see a significant impact in terms of of students accessing at all of the Middlebury schools. You know, I think the community is very much behind it. So I think for all the reasons listed, it makes a lot of sense.
Want to go ahead, Victoria? Ken?
I think Victoria was first, right? Do you want to go?
Yes, Victoria.
I just was going to say, I think it's super exciting. I think that, you know, we've been talking about this a long time. I think our community deserves this. And I think from a cost perspective, that it'll work out. I'm absolutely support making the upfront investment now to have a program that's better with more kids participating, higher quality education component added, all that. I'm all for it.
Chip?
And just anecdotally, having read the bills now for a number of years, or whatever I've been reading them, it's just amazing how many little $4, $6, $8, $10 Hannaford stuff is out there. I cannot believe that that's cost effective for our district to be buying food in those ways. So, I mean, that's an anecdote in reading bills, but on the other side of it, makes no sense to me that people are saying, oh, we got to run down and get a dozen eggs or something like that. So I would just support the absolutely too, even though it's another level, so to speak, and people can criticize it from that. But I think this one is one that we can defend really solidly, especially with Brittany's sort of forward-looking, that we can progress into something that can be much more efficient and even better.
Yeah, and we would maintain. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead,
I was
Brittany.
going to say we would maintain this sort of working relationship that we have with the Mount Abe Cooperative. They're definitely willing to sort of help us get on board with this. And actually, they don't subsidize their program much more than we do. Yeah, we subsidize right now in the budget the 6 in-house programs $75,000, and it's not enough. It's running a deficit right now, so it's kind of difficult to imagine it not improving with some central oversight.
Yeah, I would think so.
Jen?
Yes. So great. I think this is fantastic. 2 things, I guess, as a parent who has seen the small in-house program be super successful, although maybe not financially, I would just try to change the tone of the director a little bit more to supporting the chefs that are doing excellent work and finding ways to help them plan their meals collaboratively, as opposed to sort of coming in and, you know, making those menus and saying this is what you have to do now, which is probably your intent, but the letter looked to me a little bit more kind of top down. And second, if you need more support for wanting to do this, that wellness group that presented to you earlier found this to be hugely important throughout the school. So some would say that the in-house small school food system wasn't working well, that they'd had too much turnover, and that somebody, you know, they weren't able to really provide the good meals that the students wanted, where some were having huge success. So having somebody to help facilitate that would be lovely. And to then allow at Mary Hogan and the middle school and the high school more student support and participation in planning the meals, it's hugely awesome experience at the schools that are more successful in it. And I know that there are aspiring chefs and bakers out there in the middle and high school and at Mary Hogan who would love to participate more in preparing food for their classmates.
Yeah, I think that the intent is definite. You know, I noted in the memo that the rural schools, the in-house programs are really providing great food, but they're really burdened with some of the administrative tasks. And so the goal of having a director would be to take some of those administrative tasks off from them and really allow them to cook and do what they do well more. And part of that is going into the classroom and doing nutrition education and really utilizing them to their highest and best. use rather than having them tied to the desk doing procurement every time they have to go to Hannaford. So I definitely support that. And even with a more centralized menu, there's very much still room for individuality at the schools. For example, some schools love kale, some schools prefer cabbage, and there's totally room for that still. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Jen.
Great. Peter C?
Just all of that, and I know it's a hard concept to hire somebody at a time when we're talking about trying to save as much money as possible, but I would echo all of that and also say that anytime we're working in a collaborative relationship with our other two high schools in Addison County is a great step forward to doing more of that in the future.
Mary?
One last thing. I was part of the group that was looking at food service for years, and this was the program we always aspired to go with. So thank you, Brittany and Peter, for pushing it and making it happen, because it will make a huge improvement. So thank you.
That's great. Amy?
You're muted.
Unmute. There you go.
Quick follow-up question to that, because isn't one of the features of that program that they access more local food by doing the cooperative? Is that right?
I don't know. I mean, I know that they have a ton of local partnerships, so I can say that that's likely the case.
Okay. I mean, just because I think that that's a trade-off that can really be a great selling point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and when you're more organized together in terms of purchasing, I mean, we're now, as Peter mentioned, we're now essentially creating an Addison County-wide program. So, we feel like there's going to be a leverage too there in terms of purchasing and local foods, and that's pretty exciting too.
Yeah. Great. So I believe we need a motion on this one then as well.
I move to support the proposal to hire a food service director.
I'll second.
Great. All those in favor, raise your hand. Great, that's everybody's hand. So moved.
Yay.
That's exciting. Great job.
No,
really
it's so
great job.
so great to end on a high note. Yay.
That's really great job. That's nice to finish on that. Nice job.
Yeah. I just got like a shiver, actually. It was
Great. That's really great.
not sure where that came from, but I guess I was excited.
So next on the agenda is other.
Yeah, Peter gets to be Debbie Downer and have us go into executive session around negotiations, right?
So I guess I would, if there's not something else for other, I would move that we go into executive session to discuss negotiations and a personnel matter.
Great.
So move.
Great. We are now in executive session.
Second, I guess, not move.
And so central office admins, you can bid adieu.
And Peter, don't forget to hit or stop the recording as well.
Yeah, I will. I made that mistake once.
Adjournment.
So
I'll move we adjourn. Sorry, that's the honor.
Hey, everybody. Thank you very much. That is a long Zoom meeting.
It's a good meeting, though. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care.
Bye, everybody.